Millionaire signed divorce papers, mocking her. Then the judge read her father's will out loud, and his smile vanished. A greatest story of the most powerful woman. Hi, my beautiful family. Today, I lift my voice to the heavens with one prayer, for every woman listening and for every woman loved in this family. May your days be filled with health that never fades, joy that never breaks, and love that never runs dry. May your steps be steady, your heart be fearless, and your spirit forever unshaken. You are the gentle rain that heals, the sunlight that warms, and the quiet strength that holds this world together. Like and comment if you still believe in your Mr. Peter. Let's start the story. The blood of kings flows through veins that refuse to bow, even when the world demands submission. Shelley Wilson stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse office, watching the city sprawl beneath her like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Every steel beam piercing the skyline, every contract that built this empire, every strategic decision that turned millions into billions, all of it bore the invisible signature of her brilliance. Yet the nameplate on the mahogany desk behind her read, Bradley Wood, Chief Executive Officer. She had been 23 when she first met Bradley at the University Business Symposium. He was charismatic, ambitious, and utterly lost when it came to corporate strategy. She was the quiet genius whose ideas could revolutionize industries, but who lacked the silver tongue to sell them to skeptical investors. They became partners in more ways than one. While Bradley charmed investors with polished speeches, Shelley crafted the blueprints that would transform his family's modest construction company into Wood Enterprises, a multinational corporation dominating real estate development and renewable energy. She worked 18-hour days, analyzing market trends, negotiating impossible deals, and building strategic alliances. The early days had been intoxicating. Bradley would rush home after successful presentations, spinning her around their tiny apartment, calling her his secret weapon and brilliant goddess. They would spend nights planning their empire, dreaming of the legacy they would build together. He promised her recognition, respect, and equal partnership when they reached the top. Those promises had crumbled like ancient parchment. Success transformed Bradley into something unrecognizable. The higher their company climbed, the smaller she became in his eyes. What began as playful teasing evolved into cruel observations about her appearance, her worth. The man who once called her brilliant now dismissed her contributions as lucky guesses. The public humiliation started subtly. At corporate galas, Bradley would introduce her as my lovely wife, while crediting their success to his natural business instincts. He would laugh off her attempts to contribute to conversations, patting her hand condescendingly and suggesting she let the men handle business talk. Behind closed doors, the cruelty intensified. "Look at yourself, Shelley," Bradley would say, standing behind her as she prepared for corporate events. "Gray threads in your hair, lines around your eyes. You used to be beautiful. Now you look like every other middle-aged housewife desperate to hold on to relevance." He would compare her to young assistants, pointing out their smooth skin, fashionable clothes, easy laughter. "Rebecca from marketing. Now that's what success looks like on a woman. Young, vibrant, someone who enhances a man's image instead of dragging it down." The psychological warfare was methodical and relentless. He would undermine her confidence in board meetings, interrupting her presentations to clarify her points. He would schedule important decisions during her business travels, then present accomplished facts that contradicted her advice. When she protested, he would accuse her of being emotional and unable to handle real business pressure. The worst moments came during social gatherings. Bradley perfected the art of public humiliation, disguised as playful banter. At dinner parties with influential clients, he would regale tables with stories of Shelley's adorable mistakes or her cute attempts to understand complex business matters. Shelley's always been more comfortable with small, simple things, he would say with a patronizing smile. I handle the big picture while she focuses on details that women naturally excel at: organization, decoration, making sure everyone feels welcome. Guests would nod politely, unaware that Shelley's small details included multi-million-dollar acquisitions, international expansion strategies, and complex financial structures that had tripled their company's value. Each humiliation chipped away at her spirit. But Shelley had inherited something far more powerful than beauty, an unbreakable core forged by generations of women who had survived worse. Her grandmother had built a successful seamstress business when black women were denied bank loans. Her mother had become the first black woman to lead a major accounting firm in their city. They had taught her that true strength was not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain define you. So Shelley endured. She absorbed Bradley's insults, smiled through public humiliations, and continued building the empire that bore his name. But late at night, when Bradley slept peacefully beside her, she would stare at the ceiling and feel something dangerous growing. Not hatred, but something far more powerful. The slow, steady burn of a woman realizing her own worth. She had spent decades building Bradley's empire, creating the foundation that made him powerful, wealthy, and respected. Every strategic decision, every brilliant innovation, every calculated risk, all had flowed from her mind, through his voice, to the world. The final breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in November. Shelley had spent weeks preparing a presentation for their biggest potential client, a tech consortium investing billions in sustainable infrastructure. The presentation would revolutionize their industry and cement Wood Enterprises as the undisputed leader. Bradley had promised to review her work that evening. Instead, he returned home with Rebecca from marketing, laughing loudly as they entered. "Shelley, darling," Bradley called out, his voice thick with wine and arrogance. "Come meet Rebecca properly. She's been telling me fascinating ideas about tomorrow's presentation." Shelley emerged from the study, where she had been making final adjustments. Rebecca stood beside Bradley, her hand possessively on his arm. Her smile sharp as a blade. "Mrs. Wood," Rebecca said sweetly, "Bradley's been explaining how you handle the simpler business aspects. It's important to have someone managing household details while real decisions are made." Bradley laughed, pulling Rebecca closer. "Rebecca has brilliant suggestions for tomorrow. She thinks we should restructure the presentation, focus on emotional appeal, rather than all those boring technical details you love." "Technical details?" Shelley's voice was deadly quiet. "You mean the innovative solutions that will save them millions? See what I mean?" Bradley turned to Rebecca with an indulgent smile. "Always so serious, focused on little things. That's why I need someone with vision, someone who understands the bigger picture." Something crystallized in Shelley's chest, cold, hard, and absolutely unbreakable. She looked at her husband, this man she had devoted her life to building up, and saw him clearly for the first time. He was not a visionary leader or brilliant strategist. He was a parasitic fraud who had built his empire on her genius while systematically destroying her spirit. "You're right, Rebecca," Shelley said with deadly calm. "I should focus on what I'm actually good at." "What I'm actually good at," Shelley continued, "is building empires. What I'm actually good at is strategic brilliance that transforms industries. What I'm actually good at is recognizing when I've been playing the wrong game entirely." She turned and walked back toward the study, Bradley's voice calling after her with growing panic. But Shelley was done listening, done enduring, done building someone else's kingdom while her own crown gathered dust. Tomorrow, she would begin the most important presentation of her life, not to Bradley's clients, but to her attorney. Chapter 2. The Breaking Point. Freedom is not given. It is claimed by those brave enough to shatter their own chains. The law offices of Henderson, Martinez and Associates occupied the 42nd floor of the Meridian Tower, their floor-to-ceiling windows offering a commanding view of the city below. Shelley Wilson sat across from attorney Janet Henderson, watching the older woman review the divorce papers with the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Shelley?" Janet asked, her experienced eyes reflecting decades of similar conversations. "Bradley Wood is not the type of man who will accept this quietly. He'll fight dirty, and he has considerable resources at his disposal." Shelley's fingers traced the edge of the mahogany conference table, her voice steady as granite. "I've been building his empire while he's been tearing down my soul. I'm done being the ghost in my own life." Janet nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. She had represented powerful women before, knew the particular brand of psychological warfare that successful men could wage against their wives. "We need to discuss strategy. Bradley will likely try to minimize your contributions to Wood Enterprises. Claim that you were simply a supportive spouse rather than an active business partner." "Let him try," Shelley replied, opening the leather portfolio she had brought. "I have documentation of every major decision, every strategic initiative, every innovation that built that company. Financial records, email chains, board meeting minutes where my recommendations were implemented under his name. The evidence is overwhelming." Janet's eyebrows rose as she reviewed the meticulously organized documents. "This is extraordinary preparation. Most clients come in with emotions and grievances. You've come with a case. I've spent decades learning how to build bulletproof strategies," Shelley said. "This is just the first one I'm building for myself instead of him." The attorney began outlining the process, explaining how asset division would work, how the court would evaluate contributions to the marriage and business. Shelley listened with the same focused intensity she had once brought to board meetings, absorbing every detail, every potential complication. "There's something else," Janet said carefully. "I need to ask about infidelity. If there's evidence of affairs, it could impact the settlement." Shelley's laugh was bitter but controlled. "Rebecca from marketing is just the latest. There have been others over the past several seasons. I have photos, hotel receipts, credit card statements. Bradley's never been particularly discreet. He's too arrogant to think anyone would dare challenge him." "Good. That strengthens our position considerably." Janet made notes on her legal pad. "Now about timeline. When do you want to serve him?" "Today," Shelley said without hesitation. "I want this finished before he has time to hide assets or prepare his own strategy. Strike fast, strike decisively." Janet studied her client with newfound respect. "Most people need time to prepare emotionally for this kind of confrontation. You seem remarkably composed." "I've been preparing emotionally for a long time," Shelley replied. "I just didn't realize it until now." 2 hours later, Shelley stood in the marble lobby of Wood Enterprises, watching employees hurry past with the purposeful energy of a thriving corporation. How many of them knew the truth about who had really built this place? How many had absorbed Bradley's narrative that he was the visionary genius behind their success? Soon they would learn the reality. She took the executive elevator to the penthouse level, nodding to Bradley's assistant as she passed. "Is he in?" "Yes, Mrs. Wood. He's reviewing the Morrison account." "Should I announce you?" "No need," Shelley said smoothly. "I'll surprise him." Bradley was standing behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear, gesturing animatedly as he spoke to someone about quarterly projections that Shelley had calculated the night before. He looked up as she entered, holding up one finger to indicate he would be with her momentarily. "Absolutely, Morrison. Those numbers represent conservative estimates based on current market trends. We're looking at potential growth that could exceed those projections significantly." His voice carried the confident authority of a man accustomed to being believed without question. Shelley placed the divorce papers on his desk and sat down in the leather chair across from him, crossing her legs with deliberate elegance. She watched his face as his eyes registered the legal documents, saw the moment when recognition dawned. Bradley's confident tone faltered mid-sentence. "Morrison, let me call you back. Something urgent has come up." He ended the call, his eyes never leaving the papers. "What is this supposed to be?" he asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. It's exactly what it appears to be, Shelley replied calmly. Divorce papers. I'm filing for dissolution of our marriage and equitable distribution of all marital assets, including your controlling interest in Wood Enterprises. Bradley's face cycled through several expressions: disbelief, anger, and finally amused condescension. You're having some kind of breakdown, aren't you? First that dramatic little scene last night, now this. I think you need professional help. Shelley, what I need, she said, rising from her chair, is freedom from a man who thinks my intelligence exists solely to serve his ego. Bradley laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. Freedom? You think you understand what freedom means? You have no idea what it's like out there for women your age, especially women who've never had to support themselves. You think you're some kind of business genius, but you've never had to sell anything, never had to close a deal, never had to put your reputation on the line. I've been doing all of those things, Shelley replied evenly. You've just been taking credit for them. Delusional, Bradley said, shaking his head with exaggerated pity. You've convinced yourself that organizing files and taking notes makes you some kind of strategic mastermind. That's not how the real world works, Shelley. That's not how business works. He moved around the desk, positioning himself closer to her, using his height and presence in the way powerful men had been trained to intimidate. Let me explain something to you about power, about respect, about what it takes to build an empire. You can't just declare yourself important and expect the world to agree. You have to earn it, fight for it, command it. And you, he gestured dismissively, you're not built for that kind of battle. Shelley met his gaze without flinching. You're right about one thing. I'm going to have to fight for what I've earned. But you've made a critical error in your assessment. And what's that? You think this is about convincing the world that I'm important, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than his shouting. But I already know my worth. The world is about to learn it. Bradley's confident smirk wavered slightly, but he recovered quickly. You'll be back within a month, begging me to take you back. Do you have any idea what your life will look like without me? Without this? He gestured around the opulent office. You'll have nothing. You'll be nothing. I've been nothing in your eyes for a long time, Shelley replied. Now I get to discover what I am in my own. She turned toward the door, but Bradley's voice stopped her. This is a mistake you'll regret for the rest of your life. I built this empire, and I'll destroy you before I let you take any part of it. You want a fight? You'll get one. But don't expect any mercy just because we used to share a bed. Shelley paused at the doorway, looking back at him with something that might have been pity. I don't want mercy, Bradley. I want justice, and unlike you, I'm prepared to earn it. The courthouse steps felt solid beneath Shelley's feet as she climbed toward the entrance, Janet Henderson beside her, a team of legal assistants following with boxes of documentation. Behind them, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, drawn by rumors of a high-profile divorce involving one of the city's most prominent businessmen. Ready for this? Janet asked quietly. Shelley looked up at the imposing facade of the courthouse, thinking about all the battles that had been fought within those walls, all the justice that had been sought and sometimes found. I've been ready for a long time. I just needed to realize it. Inside, Bradley was already waiting with his own legal team, his posture radiating the casual confidence of a man who had never lost a battle that mattered. He caught sight of Shelley entering and leaned over to whisper something to his attorney, both men chuckling as if sharing a private joke. The courtroom filled slowly, reporters, curious colleagues, legal observers drawn by the spectacle of watching a business empire potentially torn apart. Shelley took her seat at the plaintiff's table, feeling the weight of scrutiny but also something else. The electric anticipation of a long-caged bird finally seeing an open door. Judge Patricia Reeves entered the courtroom with the measured authority of someone who had presided over countless human dramas. She was known for her fairness, her thorough attention to detail, and her complete intolerance for legal theatrics. "Good morning," Judge Reeves said, settling into her chair. We're here today for the preliminary hearing in Wilson versus Wood, dissolution of marriage with contested asset division. Are both parties ready to proceed? Both legal teams confirmed their readiness, and Judge Reeves began reviewing the basic details of the case. Shelley listened to the formal language that reduced her marriage to legal terminology, but her attention was drawn to Bradley's demeanor. He sat relaxed in his chair, occasionally leaning over to whisper to his attorney, his entire bearing suggesting a man attending a minor inconvenience rather than a serious legal proceeding. When the judge asked for preliminary statements, Bradley's attorney rose first. "Your Honor, this case represents an unfortunately common scenario. A dependent spouse seeking to claim credit for achievements that resulted from her husband's vision, leadership, and business acumen. Mrs. Wilson has been well provided for throughout their marriage, enjoying the benefits of Mr. Wood's success while contributing in traditional supportive roles. The plaintiff's claims of business partnership are greatly exaggerated and unsupported by substantive evidence." Bradley nodded approvingly, his confident smile suggesting he considered the matter already settled. Then Janet Henderson rose for Shelley's response. "Your Honor, this case represents something far more significant than a typical marital dissolution. The evidence will show that Mrs. Wilson was not merely a supportive spouse, but the primary strategic architect behind Wood Enterprises' unprecedented growth and success. However, before we proceed to that evidence, I understand there may be additional documents relevant to this case." Judge Reeves consulted her notes, her brow furrowing slightly. "Yes, there appears to be some confusion. I've received notice that there are additional estate documents that may impact asset distribution in this case. The court has been contacted regarding the estate of Mr. Robert Wilson, Mrs. Wilson's late father." Shelley felt her blood freeze, confusion washing over her features. Her father had died several seasons ago, and his estate had been settled long before her marriage to Bradley had begun deteriorating. What could possibly be relevant now? Bradley leaned forward, his confident expression shifting to curiosity mixed with continuing smugness. He whispered something to his attorney, who shrugged and shook his head. "Bailiff, please ask Mr. Peterson from Wilson and Associates to join us," Judge Reeves instructed. An elderly man entered the courtroom, carrying a leather briefcase and several official-looking documents. Shelley recognized him as her father's longtime attorney, though she couldn't understand why he would be here. Bradley's smile grew wider as he watched Shelley's obvious confusion, clearly interpreting it as evidence that she was unprepared for the complexities of real legal proceedings. What neither of them realized was that the next few minutes would change everything. Chapter 3. The Judge's Surprise. Sometimes the universe waits decades to deliver justice, but when it arrives, it comes with thunderous applause. The elderly attorney, Mr. Peterson, approached the bench with the measured steps of someone carrying momentous news. His weathered face bore the solemnity of a man who had spent decades managing the final wishes of the dead. But there was something else in his expression, a barely contained anticipation that suggested this particular revelation would be extraordinary. "Your Honor," Mr. Peterson began, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing information. "I apologize for the interruption, but there are circumstances regarding the estate of Robert Wilson that directly impact these proceedings." Judge Reeves leaned forward, her experienced eyes narrowing with interest. "Please explain, Mr. Peterson." The court was under the impression that Mr. Wilson's estate had been fully settled. "The primary estate was indeed settled," Peterson replied, opening his briefcase with deliberate precision. "However, there was a sealed provision in Mr. Wilson's will, a contingency clause that could only be activated under very specific circumstances." Shelley felt her pulse quicken, confusion and curiosity warring in her chest. Her father had been a brilliant man, a successful businessman who had built his own empire before she was born. But he had never mentioned any hidden provisions or secret arrangements. What could possibly be relevant to her divorce proceedings? Bradley shifted in his seat, his confident posture unchanged, but his eyes now focused intently on the unfolding drama. To him, this was merely an interesting sidebar to what he still considered his inevitable victory. Whatever her father had left behind could hardly compete with the empire he had built. What specific circumstances? Judge Reeves asked. Peterson's eyes found Shelley's across the courtroom, and she saw something there that made her breath catch. Pride, satisfaction, and a hint of long-awaited vindication. The provision was to be enacted only if Mrs. Wilson ever found herself in a legal proceeding where her financial security or business contributions were being challenged or diminished by a spouse. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft scratching of reporters' pens and the subtle whir of recording equipment. Even Bradley's attorney looked up from his notes, sensing that the routine divorce proceeding was about to become something far more significant. Mr. Wilson was very specific, Peterson continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. He believed that his daughter possessed extraordinary business acumen, capabilities that might one day be undervalued or dismissed by those who benefited from her intelligence while denying her credit. Bradley scoffed audibly, unable to contain his dismissive amusement. This is ridiculous. We're here to discuss marital assets, not listen to fairy tales about Mr. Wood, Judge Reeves interrupted sharply. You will remain silent while the court hears this testimony. Peterson nodded gratefully to the judge and withdrew a thick manila envelope from his briefcase. Your Honor, Robert Wilson was the founder and majority shareholder of Wilson Global Industries. At the time of his death, the company was valued at approximately $8 billion. Shelley's world tilted on its axis. Wilson Global Industries was one of the largest multinational corporations in the country, a company she had admired from afar but never connected to her father's legacy. She had known he was successful, but the scope of his empire had been deliberately hidden from her. The sealed provision, Peterson continued, stipulates that upon the activation of the contingency clause, controlling interest in Wilson Global Industries, 51% of all shares, would transfer immediately and irrevocably to his daughter, Shelley Wilson. The words hung in the air like thunderclaps, each syllable reshaping the reality of everyone present. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as reporters frantically scribbled notes and photographers adjusted their equipment. This was no longer a routine divorce proceeding. It was the birth of one of the most powerful women in corporate America. Bradley's face went through a fascinating transformation. His confident smirk faltered, replaced by confusion, then growing alarm as the implications began to penetrate his consciousness. The woman he had spent the morning mocking as powerless and delusional had just inherited an empire that dwarfed his own achievements. Furthermore, Peterson added, consulting another document, Mr. Wilson included a personal letter to be read aloud at this time. Judge Reeves nodded, her own expression reflecting amazement at the unprecedented nature of these revelations. Please proceed. Peterson cleared his throat and began reading in Robert Wilson's own words, preserved through careful legal documentation. My dearest Shelley, if you are hearing this letter, it means that someone has attempted to diminish your worth or deny your contributions to their success. I am not surprised. Throughout my life, I watched brilliant women be marginalized, dismissed, and forgotten, while lesser men took credit for their achievements. I have spent decades building Wilson Global Industries with one purpose, ensuring that you would never be dependent on anyone who failed to recognize your extraordinary capabilities. You inherited my strategic mind, my analytical brilliance, and my ability to see opportunities that others miss. But more importantly, you inherited your mother's strength, her grace under pressure, and her refusal to accept less than she deserved. I deliberately kept the scope of my business empire hidden from you because I wanted you to develop your own strength, to prove your capabilities in your own arena. Watching you build Wood Enterprises from the shadows has filled me with immense pride. Every strategic decision you made, every innovation you developed, every crisis you navigated, I saw it all, and I documented it all. The company you now control has been waiting for your leadership. The board of directors has been briefed on your qualifications and contributions to the business world. They are eager to work under your guidance. Never again allow anyone to make you feel small. You are the daughter of kings and queens, the inheritor of legacy and power. Use both wisely. The courtroom was utterly silent as Peterson folded the letter. Shelley sat motionless, tears streaming down her face as she absorbed the magnitude of her father's gift. Not just the financial empire, but the validation, the recognition, the proof that someone had always known her true worth. Bradley looked as though he had been struck by lightning. The woman he had dismissed as nothing without him now controlled assets worth more than 10 times his own net worth. The wife he had mocked for aging and irrelevance was now one of the most powerful business leaders in the world. "Your Honor," Janet Henderson said, rising slowly as she processed the seismic shift in their case. "I believe this development significantly impacts the asset division discussion." Judge Reeves nodded, still seemingly stunned by the morning's revelations. "Indeed, Mr. Peterson, are there any additional documents or provisions the court should be aware of?" "One final element," Peterson replied, withdrawing another sealed envelope. Mr. Wilson included specific instructions regarding any legal challenges to Mrs. Wilson's inheritance, or attempts to claim community property, rights over Wilson Global Industries. Bradley's attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, if these assets were acquired during the marriage through inheritance—" "The inheritance was established before the marriage," Peterson interrupted smoothly. "And the triggering event specifically relates to challenges to Mrs. Wilson's business capabilities. The legal structure is ironclad." The reporters in the gallery were practically vibrating with excitement, recognizing that they were witnessing one of the most dramatic reversals of fortune in recent legal history. Flash photography began popping, despite the bailiff's efforts to maintain order. Bradley leaned over to whisper frantically to his attorney, his confident demeanor completely shattered. The man who had entered the courtroom expecting to minimize his wife's claims to his empire now found himself legally separated from a woman whose business empire made his look like a small regional operation. "Mrs. Wilson," Judge Reeves said, addressing Shelley directly, "do you have any questions about these developments?" Shelley rose slowly, her composure returning as the shock began to transform into something far more powerful, determination mixed with long overdue recognition. "Your Honor, I have just one question for Mr. Peterson. Please proceed. When my father said he documented my contributions to Wood Enterprises, what exactly did he mean?" Peterson smiled, the expression transforming his elderly features with genuine warmth. "Your father hired a discreet investigation firm to document your role in building Wood Enterprises. Every strategic memo you wrote, every innovative solution you developed, every crisis you managed, all of it has been carefully recorded and verified. The documentation includes audio recordings, email analysis, and testimony from key business partners who were aware of your actual contributions." The implications hit Bradley like a physical blow. Not only was his wife now vastly more powerful than him financially, but there was documented proof that she had been the true architect of his success. His entire public persona was about to be revealed as an elaborate fraud. Shelley turned to look at Bradley directly for the first time since the revelations began. The woman who had entered the courtroom, seeking a fair division of assets, now possessed the power to destroy him completely, financially, professionally, and personally. But instead of triumph, her expression showed something far more dangerous to Bradley's future: complete indifference to his existence. "Your Honor," she said quietly, "I believe we can proceed with the divorce proceedings, though I suspect the asset division discussion has become considerably simpler." Judge Reeves nodded, struggling to maintain judicial composure in the face of such extraordinary circumstances. "Indeed, we'll adjourn for today to allow all parties to process these developments. Mr. Wood, Mrs. Wilson, I trust you can work out the remaining details through your attorneys." As the courtroom began to empty, reporters rushed toward the exits to file their stories about the most shocking business development in recent memory. By evening, the transformation of Shelley Wilson from dismissed housewife to corporate powerhouse would be headline news across the nation. Bradley sat frozen in his chair, watching his world crumble with each departing journalist. The woman he had mocked that morning now controlled the destiny of thousands of employees, billions in assets, and enough influence to reshape entire industries, and she had only just begun to discover the scope of her own power. Chapter 4. The Power Shift. The crown that has always belonged to you feels surprisingly light when you finally claim it. The steps of the courthouse felt different beneath Shelley's feet as she descended toward the waiting crowd of reporters. Every stone seemed more solid, every breath of air more invigorating, every heartbeat more purposeful. Behind her, the legal proceeding that had begun as a desperate bid for freedom had transformed into something far more magnificent, the public coronation of a queen who had spent decades ruling from the shadows. The media frenzy was immediate and overwhelming. Cameras flashed in rapid succession, microphones thrust toward her face, and voices called out questions that blended into an incomprehensible chorus of excitement and curiosity. "Mrs. Wilson, how does it feel to suddenly become one of the most powerful women in America? What are your plans for Wilson Global Industries? Will you be taking action against your husband for claiming credit for your work? How long have you known about your inheritance?" Shelley paused at the center of the media storm, her attorney Janet Henderson beside her, and felt something she had not experienced in decades, the intoxicating sensation of being seen, truly seen, for exactly who she had always been. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying with natural authority that silenced the crowd. "Today has been a day of revelations, not just for me, but for everyone who believes that true worth eventually finds its way to the surface." Behind her, Bradley emerged from the courthouse with his legal team, his face a mask of barely controlled panic. He had clearly hoped to escape through a side exit, but the building was surrounded by reporters and photographers, eager to capture both sides of this extraordinary story. "I want to be very clear about something," Shelley continued, her eyes finding Bradley's across the crowd. "Power is not about revenge, it's about responsibility. It's about using influence to build rather than destroy, to elevate rather than diminish, to create opportunities rather than eliminate them." A reporter called out, "Mrs. Wilson, what message do you have for women who might be in similar situations?" Shelley's smile was radiant as she answered, "Know your worth. Document your contributions. Never accept less than you deserve. And remember that sometimes the universe is just waiting for the right moment to show the world what you're truly capable of." Bradley attempted to push through the crowd toward his waiting car, but reporters swarmed around him like iron filings drawn to a magnet. "Mr. Wood, how do you respond to allegations that your wife was the real architect behind Wood Enterprises' success? Will you be challenging Mrs. Wilson's inheritance? What's your reaction to becoming married to one of the most powerful business leaders in the country?" Bradley's response was a study in desperation disguised as bravado. "This is all very sudden and unprecedented. I'm sure once the shock wears off, we can discuss this situation rationally." Shelley is obviously overwhelmed by these developments. "Mr. Wood," another reporter interrupted, "sources indicate that documentation exists proving Mrs. Wilson's strategic role in building your company. How do you respond to those claims? The color drained from Bradley's face as he realized that his carefully constructed public image was about to be dissected by investigative journalists with access to documented proof of his deception. I have no comment at this time. He pushed through the crowd more aggressively, nearly knocking over a photographer in his haste to escape. The desperation in his movements was captured by dozens of cameras, creating a visual narrative that would dominate business news for weeks to come. Shelley watched his retreat with detached interest, feeling neither satisfaction nor sympathy. Bradley had become irrelevant to her future, a minor character in a story that was only just beginning to unfold. "Mrs. Wilson," Janet Henderson whispered, "we should discuss next steps. You'll need to transition into active leadership of Wilson Global Industries, and there are dozens of decisions that require immediate attention." Shelley nodded, but before leaving, she addressed the media one final time. "I want to thank my father, Robert Wilson, for having the wisdom and foresight to ensure that justice would eventually prevail. His faith in my abilities has been vindicated today, and I intend to honor his legacy by leading Wilson Global Industries with the same integrity and vision that built the company." The crowd erupted with follow-up questions, but Shelley simply smiled and walked toward her waiting car, leaving the reporters to craft their stories about the most dramatic corporate power shift in recent memory. As her car pulled away from the courthouse, Shelley allowed herself a moment to process the magnitude of what had just occurred. That morning, she had awakened as the undervalued wife of a dismissive husband. By afternoon, she controlled a business empire worth billions and commanded the attention of the international business community. But more than the financial transformation, she felt something deeper, the restoration of her sense of self-worth, the validation of capabilities she had always possessed but rarely been credited for, and the intoxicating freedom that came with finally being recognized for her true contributions. Her phone began ringing almost immediately. The first call was from Margaret Torres, the interim CEO who had been managing Wilson Global Industries since her father's death. "Ms. Wilson," Margaret's voice was warm but professionally excited, "I've been waiting for this day for longer than you can imagine. Your father spoke of you constantly, and we've all been eager to welcome you into active leadership." "I appreciate that, Margaret. I'll need comprehensive briefings on all current projects, financial standings, and strategic initiatives. Can we schedule a full leadership meeting for tomorrow morning?" "Absolutely. I should also mention that the board of directors has called an emergency session for this evening. They want to formally welcome you and discuss immediate transition plans." Shelley felt a surge of energy as she contemplated stepping into the role she had been unconsciously preparing for her entire adult life. "Schedule it. And Margaret, I want detailed analysis of all our current business partnerships and competitive positions. It's time to see what we're truly capable of." The second call came from someone unexpected, David Chen, the CEO of one of Wood Enterprises' biggest competitors. "Shelley," David's voice carried a mixture of amazement and strategic interest, "I just saw the news coverage. Congratulations on an absolutely extraordinary development." "Thank you, David, though I suspect this isn't entirely a social call." David laughed. "You always were perceptive. I'm calling because Harrison and Associates has been trying to secure a partnership with Wilson Global Industries for several months. We've been working through your interim management, but now that you're taking direct control, you're hoping to bypass the lengthy negotiation process," Shelley finished. "I'm listening." "We've prepared a comprehensive proposal for a joint venture in renewable energy infrastructure. The potential market is enormous, and combining our resources could position both companies as industry leaders." Shelley found herself analyzing the proposition with the same strategic clarity she had brought to building Bradley's empire. But now, for her own benefit, send me the full proposal. I'll review it and get back to you within 48 hours. Shelley, I have to ask, how does it feel to go from building someone else's empire to commanding your own? The question struck her as profoundly significant. It feels like coming home to a place I never knew existed. Meanwhile, across the city, Bradley was discovering the harsh realities of his transformed circumstances. His own phone had been ringing constantly, but the calls were far less congratulatory. The first came from Thomas Morrison, the client whose account Bradley had been discussing when Shelley delivered the divorce papers. "Bradley, I've been watching the news coverage of your divorce proceedings. These allegations about your wife being the strategic force behind Wood Enterprises, how much of that is accurate?" Bradley's response was defensive and increasingly frantic. "Thomas, you can't believe everything you see in the media. Shelley's having some kind of emotional breakdown, making exaggerated claims. The reporters are saying there's documented evidence, audio recordings, email analysis, verified testimony from business partners. That sounds fairly substantial." Bradley felt the foundation of his professional reputation beginning to crumble. Even if she contributed to some projects, the vision, the leadership, the client relationships, all of that came from me. "I see," Thomas said carefully. "Well, I think we need to reevaluate our partnership agreement. I'll be in touch." The line went dead, leaving Bradley staring at his phone in growing horror. If Morrison was having doubts, other clients would be conducting their own reassessments of their relationships with Wood Enterprises. The second call confirmed his worst fears. Patricia Valdez, the chief financial officer of their largest institutional investor, was direct and unforgiving. "Bradley, we've been analyzing the strategic decisions that built Wood Enterprises' value, and the timeline correlations are disturbing. Every major innovation, every successful expansion, every crisis management success, they all align with documented contributions from your wife. Patricia, surely you don't believe what I believe is irrelevant. What I know is that our investment was based on faith in leadership capabilities that may have been misrepresented. We'll be conducting a full audit of our partnership agreements." Bradley realized that his financial empire was not just threatened, it was already beginning to collapse as investors and partners reassessed their relationships with a man whose competence was now in serious question back at Wilson, Global Industries headquarters. Shelley was experiencing the opposite phenomenon as news of her inheritance and business acumen spread through corporate networks. Her phone became a constant stream of partnership offers, congratulations from industry leaders, and requests for strategic consultations. The most significant call came from Senator Catherine Walsh, who served on several key business regulation committees. "Ms. Wilson, I wanted to personally congratulate you on today's developments and extend an invitation to testify before our Committee on Sustainable Business Practices. Your insights would be invaluable to our upcoming legislation." Shelley realized that her influence was already extending far beyond corporate boardrooms into the realm of public policy and political leadership. "I would be honored, Senator. Sustainable business practices have been a passion of mine for quite some time. I'm not surprised. Your reputation for strategic innovation precedes you, even if it was previously overshadowed by others taking credit." As the day progressed, Shelley began to understand the true scope of her transformation. She was not just inheriting a company, she was stepping into a position of influence that could reshape industries, affect government policy, and create opportunities for countless others. But perhaps most importantly, she was finally living as the woman she had always been, beneath the surface, brilliant, strategic, powerful, and absolutely unstoppable. The sun was setting over the city as Shelley prepared for her first board meeting as the controlling shareholder of Wilson Global Industries. She looked at herself in the mirror of her hotel suite, seeing not the dismissed wife of a cruel husband, but the rightful heir to an empire built on vision, integrity, and unwavering determination. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tonight, She would simply savor the intoxicating sensation of finally being exactly who she was meant to be. But across town, Bradley Wood was discovering that falling from grace could happen even faster than rising to power, and that the woman he had spent decades diminishing was about to become the architect of his complete professional destruction. Chapter 5. Rising Above. True leaders are not born from comfort, but forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by the strength to lift others as they rise. The boardroom on the 50th floor of Wilson Global Industries had witnessed countless strategic decisions over the decades, but never one quite like this. Shelley Wilson sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, surrounded by 12 accomplished executives, and felt the weight of legacy settling comfortably on her shoulders. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying natural authority that had been suppressed for too long. "We are not here merely to manage a business empire. We are here to redefine what corporate leadership can accomplish when it prioritizes purpose alongside profit." Margaret Torres, the interim CEO, who would now serve as Chief Operations Officer, leaned forward with evident enthusiasm. "Ms. Wilson, the entire leadership team has been eager to implement the vision your father outlined. He spoke frequently about your strategic capabilities and your commitment to sustainable business practices." Shelley nodded, feeling her father's wisdom guiding her as she stepped into the role she had been unconsciously preparing for her entire adult life. "Then let's begin with something ambitious. I want to establish the Wilson Foundation for Women's Economic Empowerment. We'll start with a billion-dollar endowment focused on providing business education, startup capital, and mentorship for women who have been marginalized in their professional pursuits." The room erupted in surprised murmurs as executives processed the magnitude of her proposal. David Harrison, the chief financial officer, consulted his notes rapidly. "Ms. Wilson, that's certainly unprecedented. The financial impact would be significant, though manageable given our current asset position." "David," Shelley said with a slight smile, "I've spent decades watching billion-dollar decisions being made. The difference is that this time we're investing in solutions rather than problems." She moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a commanding view of the city below. "I want to see women who've been told they're too emotional for leadership roles running their own companies. I want to see mothers dismissed as distracted by childcare leading innovative startups. I want to see wives who have been building empires in their husbands' names finally getting credit for their brilliance." The passion in her voice was infectious, spreading through the room like electricity. These executives were accustomed to quarterly profit reports and shareholder returns, but Shelley was offering them something more compelling: the opportunity to create lasting change while building sustainable business success. "Additionally," she continued, "I want to launch the Wilson Children's Education Initiative. We'll partner with school districts in underserved communities to provide technology resources, teacher training, and scholarship programs." Rebecca Martinez, the Chief Technology Officer, spoke up with growing excitement. "Ms. Wilson, our technology division has been developing educational software platforms that could be perfect for this initiative. We could customize the programs specifically for the communities we're targeting." As the meeting progressed, Shelley outlined strategic initiatives that would revolutionize not only Wilson Global Industries, but their entire industry's approach to corporate responsibility. Every decision reflected the same innovative thinking that had built Wood Enterprises, but now channeled toward purposes that aligned with her deepest values. The transformation was immediate and visible. Within hours, news outlets were reporting on Wilson Global Industries' unprecedented commitment to social impact investing. The business world watched with fascination as Shelley demonstrated that substantial philanthropy and aggressive business growth were not mutually exclusive goals. The most powerful response came from women across the country who recognized themselves in Shelley's story. Social media exploded with testimonials from wives, mothers, and female employees who had been building their own invisible empires while receiving no recognition. Shelley's story began trending as women shared experiences of developing strategies implemented under male colleagues' names, managing complex projects while being credited as assistants, and building businesses that their husbands took credit for creating. Meanwhile, the impact on Wood Enterprises was swift and devastating. Bradley's carefully constructed reputation was crumbling as investors, clients, and partners reassessed their relationships with a man whose competence was now seriously questioned. The first major blow came from Harrison and Associates, Wood Enterprises' largest client. The CEO David Chen called Bradley personally to deliver the news. Bradley, after reviewing the documentation regarding strategic decisions over the past several years, "We've decided to terminate our partnership effective immediately." Bradley's voice carried barely controlled desperation. "David, surely you don't believe everything you're reading in the media. Actually, we've had our own concerns about strategic inconsistencies. There were occasions when your presentations didn't align with our preliminary discussions. Now we understand why." By the end of the week, Wood Enterprises had lost 60% of its major clients and 70% of its institutional investors. The company that had taken decades to build was collapsing in a matter of days. But Bradley's humiliation extended beyond financial losses. The business community that had once celebrated him as a visionary leader now viewed him as a fraud who had built his reputation on stolen brilliance. Invitations to corporate events were rescinded, speaking engagements were cancelled, and professional associations quietly removed him from leadership positions. The media coverage was relentless and unforgiving. Business magazines published detailed analyses comparing strategic decisions made during Shelley's documented involvement with decisions made during her absences. The pattern was unmistakable. Innovation flourished when she was involved. Mediocrity prevailed when she was not. The Wood Enterprises deception. How one woman built an empire while her husband took credit became the cover story of 3 major business publications simultaneously. Most painful for Bradley was the response from his own employees. Staff members, who had worked closely with both him and Shelley, began speaking openly about her unrecognized contributions. Rebecca from marketing found herself ostracized by colleagues who now understood her role in supporting Bradley's deception. Meanwhile, Shelley's influence continued expanding exponentially. The Wilson Foundation's first initiative provided startup capital to 200 women entrepreneurs within its first month. The recipients included a former corporate lawyer passed over for partnership despite bringing in more clients than male colleagues, a software engineer whose innovative designs had been credited to her supervisor, and a financial analyst whose strategic recommendations had generated millions in profit for companies that refused to promote her. The Children's Education Initiative proved equally impactful. Wilson Global Industries partnered with school districts in 12 cities, providing technology resources that revolutionized educational opportunities for thousands of students. The program's success attracted additional corporate partners, creating a collaborative model that other companies began replicating. But perhaps most significantly, Shelley's leadership style began influencing corporate culture throughout their industry. Companies started implementing more inclusive decision-making processes, recognizing employee contributions more equitably, and prioritizing long-term social impact alongside quarterly profits. The business world was witnessing a practical demonstration that companies led by principled, strategic thinkers could achieve superior results while creating positive social change. The phone call that defined the new reality came from Senator Catherine Walsh, who was spearheading legislation on corporate governance and social responsibility. Shelley, I want to invite you to serve as the primary witness for our upcoming hearings on redefining corporate leadership accountability. Your story exemplifies everything we're trying to address through this legislation. I would be honored, Senator. But I want to be clear, this isn't about individual recognition. It's about creating systems that prevent brilliant women from being marginalized, while incompetent men claim credit for their achievements. As Shelley ended the call, she reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had occurred. The woman who had been dismissed as nothing without him was now being sought as an authority on corporate leadership by the highest levels of government. But across the city, Bradley Wood was discovering that losing everything you never truly earned could happen with shocking speed. Chapter 6. Desperate Measures. Desperation makes fools of the arrogant and reveals the true character of those who mistake borrowed brilliance for personal achievement. The mahogany desk that had once symbolized Bradley Wood's corporate dominance now felt like a prison, its polished surface reflecting a face marked by sleepless nights and growing desperation. The Wood Enterprises executive suite, which had buzzed with the energy of a thriving business empire just weeks earlier, was now haunted by the echoes of departing employees and cancelled contracts. Bradley stared at the latest quarterly projections, watching his company's value evaporate with mathematical precision. Every day brought new defections, clients, investors, key personnel, all fleeing an organization that had been revealed as a hollow shell built on stolen brilliance. "Sir," his assistant's voice came through the intercom with obvious reluctance. "Margaret Torres from Wilson Global Industries is on line 3. Bradley's pulse quickened with desperate hope. Margaret had been a long-time contact in the industry, someone who might understand that the media coverage was exaggerated, that he deserved another chance to prove his capabilities. "Margaret," he said, injecting his voice with the confident charm that had once opened doors and secured deals. "I was hoping you'd call. This whole situation with Shelley has been blown completely out of proportion by the media." "Hello, Bradley." Margaret's voice was professionally neutral, carrying none of the warmth that had characterized their past interactions. "I'm calling because Ms. Wilson asked me to extend an offer." Bradley's hopes soared. Shelley was going to help him salvage his reputation, prove that she wasn't vindictive, that their shared history meant something despite their personal difficulties. "That's wonderful, Margaret. I knew Shelley would come to her senses eventually. She understands better than anyone what we built together." "Actually, Bradley, the offer is for Wilson Global Industries to acquire Wood Enterprises' remaining assets and client base. We're prepared to offer fair market value for your intellectual property and infrastructure." The words hit Bradley like a physical blow. This wasn't reconciliation, it was corporate cannibalism. Shelley wasn't offering to save his company. She was offering to buy its corpse. That's unacceptable," Bradley stammered, his carefully maintained composure cracking. "Wood Enterprises isn't for sale. I'm not interested in liquidating everything I've built." "Everything you've built?" Margaret's question carried subtle but unmistakable challenge. "Bradley, the documentation regarding strategic development of Wood Enterprises is quite comprehensive. The intellectual property you believe you own was largely developed by Ms. Wilson during your marriage." Bradley felt his world shifting beneath him as the implications became clear. Not only was his company collapsing, but the innovations he considered his greatest achievements could potentially be claimed by Shelley as community property developed during their marriage. "I need to think about this," he said weakly. "Of course. You have 72 hours to consider the offer. After that, we'll be pursuing other acquisition opportunities in your market sector." The line went dead, leaving Bradley alone with the crushing realization that Shelley wasn't just succeeding, she was systematically dismantling everything he had built using her foundation. His second call of the morning came from David Chen at Harrison and Associates, the competitor who had terminated their partnership. "Bradley, I wanted to speak with you about a potential opportunity." Again, Bradley felt a surge of desperate hope. Perhaps some of his former allies were beginning to question the media narrative, recognizing that his contributions had been undervalued. "David, I appreciate you reaching out. I've been hoping that people would start seeing past the sensationalized coverage and recognize the real situation." "Actually, Bradley, I'm calling because we're planning to approach Ms. Wilson about a strategic partnership between Harrison and Associates and Wilson Global Industries. Given your personal relationship with her, I was wondering if you might facilitate an introduction." The request was like salt in an open wound. David wasn't calling to restore their business relationship. He was asking Bradley to help him establish a connection with the woman who had replaced him in the corporate hierarchy. "You want me to introduce you to my wife, so you can do business with her instead of me," Bradley said flatly. "Ex-wife, technically. And yes, that's exactly what I'm asking. Wilson Global Industries is now one of the most influential companies in our sector. Any serious business leader needs to establish relationships with Ms. Wilson's organization." Bradley ended the call without responding, staring at his reflection in the darkened computer screen. The man who had once commanded respect from industry leaders was now being asked to serve as an intermediary to reach the woman he had spent decades diminishing. The humiliation was complete. But Bradley's reaction was not acceptance. It was growing fury, fueled by desperate self-preservation. He began making a list of everyone who had turned against him, everyone who had chosen Shelley's narrative over his own version of events. The list grew longer with each passing hour. Clients, investors, media contacts, even former friends who had distanced themselves from his tainted reputation. "She's poisoned them all against me," he muttered to his empty office. "Somehow she's convinced the entire business world that I'm incompetent, that everything I accomplished was really her work." Bradley's anger began crystallizing into something more dangerous, a calculated plan to restore his reputation by destroying hers. He spent the afternoon researching Wilson Global Industries' current structure, identifying potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited. Every successful company had secrets, shortcuts, questionable decisions that could be exposed to undermine public confidence. His first target was Dr. Amanda Foster, Wilson Global Industries' newly appointed Director of Sustainable Development. Amanda had been hired specifically to oversee the environmental initiatives that were generating positive media coverage for Shelley's leadership. Bradley scheduled a lunch meeting with Amanda under the pretense of discussing potential collaboration between their companies. What he actually wanted was insider information about Wilson Global Industries' operations that could be used to identify weaknesses. "Amanda, I appreciate you meeting with me despite the complex circumstances," Bradley said over expensive wine at an upscale restaurant. "I want you to know that I harbor no resentment toward Shelley. I think what she's building at Wilson Global Industries is remarkable." Amanda studied him carefully, clearly aware of the public narrative surrounding their divorce. "That's generous of you, Bradley. Most people in your situation might be less understanding." "Well, I've always believed that personal difficulties shouldn't interfere with professional respect," Bradley lied smoothly. "In fact, I'm hoping we might find ways for Wood Enterprises to support some of Wilson Global Industries' initiatives." Over the next hour, Bradley carefully extracted information about Wilson Global Industries' internal operations, upcoming projects, and strategic decision-making processes. Amanda, flattered by his apparent interest in collaboration, shared details about budget allocations, timeline pressures, and potential challenges facing several high-profile initiatives. Bradley filed away every piece of information, already planning how it could be weaponized against Shelley's growing empire. His second target was Marcus Chen, a mid-level financial analyst who had been passed over for promotion when Shelley restructured Wilson Global Industries' leadership team. Bradley reached out through mutual professional contacts, suggesting a confidential conversation about missed opportunities. "Marcus, I understand you've been experiencing some frustration with the new direction at Wilson Global Industries," Bradley said during their meeting at a hotel bar across town from both their offices. Marcus was cautious, but clearly harboring resentment. "The restructuring has been challenging. A lot of qualified people have been overlooked in favor of external hires who fit Ms. Wilson's vision. That must be particularly difficult given your expertise and tenure with the company," Bradley said sympathetically. "I imagine you have insights into how decisions are really being made." "There's definitely a disconnect between the public narrative and the internal reality," Marcus admitted after his third drink. "Some of these charitable initiatives are creating budget strains that aren't being reported accurately to shareholders." Bradley's eyes gleamed with predatory interest. "That sounds like something that could become problematic if it's not addressed properly." "Probably, but who's going to challenge Ms. Wilson? She's being treated like some kind of corporate saint by the media." "Well," Bradley said carefully, "sometimes the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when people with inside knowledge decide to speak up." By the end of their conversation, Bradley had laid the groundwork for Marcus to serve as an inside source, providing ongoing intelligence about Wilson Global Industries' internal operations and potential vulnerabilities. His most ambitious target was Jennifer Walsh, the head of Wilson Global Industries' Public Relations Department. Jennifer had been instrumental in crafting the positive media coverage that had elevated Shelley's profile. But Bradley believed everyone had a price for the right information. The approach required more subtlety. Bradley arranged for a mutual contact to suggest that Jennifer might be interested in a lucrative consulting opportunity with a major corporation that preferred to remain anonymous initially. When Jennifer agreed to the meeting, Bradley presented himself as a representative of an unnamed competitor seeking insights into Wilson Global Industries' public relations strategies. "We're particularly interested in understanding how Ms. Wilson has managed to generate such favorable coverage despite the controversial circumstances of her rise to power," Bradley said, carefully avoiding direct identification of himself as the source of the inquiry. Jennifer was professional but curious about the consulting opportunity. Ms. Wilson's story resonates with people because it represents something authentic, a brilliant woman finally getting recognition for capabilities that were previously overlooked. "But surely there must be aspects of the narrative that are simplified for public consumption," Bradley pressed. "Most corporate success stories are more complex than they appear in media coverage." "Actually, if anything, the media coverage understates Ms. Wilson's capabilities," Jennifer replied. "The documentation of her strategic contributions is overwhelming. We've barely scratched the surface of what she accomplished while building Wood Enterprises." Bradley realized that his attempt to find insider allies was failing because Shelley's success was genuinely based on documented competence rather than manufactured public relations. But his desperation was growing, stronger than his rational assessment of the situation. If he couldn't find willing conspirators, he would have to create opportunities for sabotage through other means. Late that evening, Bradley sat in his empty office drafting anonymous emails to business reporters, suggesting that Wilson Global Industries' financial projections were overly optimistic and that Shelley's charitable initiatives were unsustainable vanity projects funded by unrealistic budget assumptions. He created fake social media accounts to spread rumors about conflicts within Wilson Global Industries' leadership team and to question whether Shelley's rapid rise to power had been achieved through legitimate means. Most dangerously, he began reaching out to Marcus Chen and others who had expressed private frustrations with Wilson Global Industries' new direction. encouraging them to document and report any irregular decisions or questionable financial practices they observed. Bradley's plan was simple. If he couldn't restore his own reputation through legitimate success, he would destroy Shelley's reputation through systematic sabotage. He would plant seeds of doubt about her competence, create artificial crises that would test her leadership, and gradually erode the public confidence that had elevated her to corporate stardom. What Bradley failed to understand was that his father-in-law's planning had been far more comprehensive than anyone realized, and that the woman he was attempting to sabotage had inherited not just financial resources, but strategic protections that were about to transform his desperate schemes into the final chapter of his own destruction. As Bradley worked late into the night crafting his revenge plot, he had no idea that every move he was making had been anticipated, documented, and prepared for by a man who had spent decades protecting his daughter from exactly this kind of threat. The war between Bradley Wood and Shelley Wilson was about to escalate, but only one of them truly understood the rules of engagement. Chapter 7: The Hidden Betrayal. The most dangerous enemies are those who smile while they sharpen their knives, believing their victims too trusting to recognize the blade. Marcus Chen sat in his car outside Wilson Global Industries headquarters, staring at the encrypted phone Bradley Wood had provided him with trembling hands. The device felt impossibly heavy for something so small, weighted with the gravity of betrayal and the promise of financial reward that had convinced him to cross a line he never thought he would approach. "Just document any questionable decisions," Bradley had said during their third clandestine meeting. "Financial irregularities, budget overruns, employee complaints, anything that suggests the company is being mismanaged under her leadership." The $50,000 Bradley had transferred to Marcus's offshore account was more money than he had ever possessed at one time. But as he prepared to enter the building and begin his systematic sabotage, he wondered if any amount could justify what he was about to do. Inside Wilson Global Industries, the morning leadership meeting was beginning with the kind of energy that had become characteristic of Shelley's transformational management style. The boardroom buzzed with discussions of innovative projects, strategic expansions, and social impact initiatives generating both profit and positive change. The Children's Education Initiative is exceeding all projections, Rebecca Martinez reported, her enthusiasm evident as she outlined success metrics. "We've now provided technology resources to 15 school districts, and the academic improvement data is remarkable." Shelley smiled with genuine satisfaction. "That's exactly the kind of measurable impact I hoped we could achieve. What about the scalability analysis for expanding to additional districts?" As the meeting progressed, Marcus took detailed notes, not of the strategic brilliance being displayed, but of any statements that could be twisted to suggest financial irresponsibility or unrealistic planning. He recorded budget figures that could be taken out of context, employee concerns that could be magnified into major conflicts, and timeline challenges that could be portrayed as evidence of poor leadership. After the meeting, Marcus lingered in his office, drafting carefully worded reports that would present Wilson Global Industries' remarkable success as a series of problems waiting to explode. He sent encrypted summaries to Bradley, highlighting every minor challenge as a major crisis and every ambitious goal as evidence of unrealistic expectations. Bradley received the intelligence with growing excitement, immediately recognizing how the information could be weaponized against Shelley's reputation. He began crafting anonymous tips to business journalists, suggesting that Wilson Global Industries was experiencing internal conflicts and financial strain that the media was ignoring. His first target was Jonathan Mitchell, an investigative reporter for Corporate America Weekly who specialized in exposing business fraud and executive misconduct. Bradley contacted Mitchell through an anonymous email account, claiming to be a concerned employee with insider knowledge of financial irregularities. Ms. Wilson's charitable initiatives are being funded through accounting practices that may not withstand regulatory scrutiny, Bradley wrote. Budget allocations are being shifted between departments to create the appearance of sustainability while hiding cost overruns. To support his claims, Bradley included select quotes from Marcus's reports, carefully edited to remove context and present normal business challenges as evidence of systemic problems. Mitchell was intrigued by the allegations, particularly given Wilson Global Industries' recent prominence in business news. He began preliminary research into the company's financial disclosures, looking for discrepancies between public statements and regulatory filings. Bradley's second attack came through social media manipulation. Using fake accounts and automated posting systems, he began spreading rumors about conflicts within Wilson Global Industries' leadership team. The posts suggested that Shelley's rapid rise to power had created resentment among longtime employees, and that several key executives were considering resignation. Most dangerously, Bradley began reaching out to other disgruntled former Wood Enterprises employees, encouraging them to make anonymous complaints to regulatory agencies about potential violations they might have witnessed during Shelley's involvement with his company. If she was really making all those strategic decisions, Bradley told Rebecca from marketing during a carefully orchestrated meeting, then she might have been involved in some of the gray area practices that helped Wood Enterprises grow so quickly. Rebecca, still bitter about her diminished status following Bradley's public humiliation, was receptive to suggestions that Shelley's success might not be entirely legitimate. There were definitely times when she pushed for aggressive strategies that skirted regulatory guidelines. Within days, Rebecca had filed anonymous complaints with 3 different regulatory agencies, alleging that Shelley might be using questionable financial practices at Wilson Global Industries, similar to strategies she had supposedly implemented at Wood Enterprises. The complaints triggered preliminary investigations that, while ultimately groundless, created bureaucratic challenges and negative publicity that began to impact Wilson Global Industries' stock price and public perception. Bradley's most sophisticated attack involved Jennifer Walsh, the public relations director he had attempted to recruit as an informant. When Jennifer refused to provide insider information, Bradley hired a private investigation firm to dig into her background, looking for personal or professional vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The investigators discovered that Jennifer had been involved in a minor traffic accident several months earlier, an incident that had resulted in a small insurance claim. Bradley's team created a false narrative, suggesting that Jennifer had committed insurance fraud, then threatened to publicize the fabricated allegations unless she cooperated with their intelligence-gathering efforts. Faced with potential career destruction based on false accusations, Jennifer reluctantly agreed to provide Bradley with advance notice of Wilson Global Industries' public relations strategies and media announcements. Armed with this intelligence, Bradley was able to coordinate negative publicity campaigns that would be released immediately after positive news about Wilson Global Industries, creating a pattern of controversy that began to overshadow the company's legitimate achievements. The cumulative effect of Bradley's sabotage campaign was subtle but measurable. Wilson Global Industries' stock price began experiencing unusual volatility. Regulatory agencies were asking questions that required expensive legal responses, and business journalists were starting to investigate allegations that demanded time and resources to address. Dr. Amanda Foster was the first to notice the pattern. During a routine review of media coverage, she identified several instances where negative stories about Wilson Global Industries had been published immediately following positive announcements, and she began to suspect that someone with inside knowledge was coordinating the attacks. "Ms. Wilson," Amanda said during a private meeting, I think we may have a serious problem. The timing of these negative stories is too precise to be coincidental. Shelley reviewed the evidence Amanda had compiled, her strategic mind immediately recognizing the sophisticated nature of the attack campaign. This isn't random criticism or legitimate journalism. Someone is conducting systematic psychological warfare against our company. The question is, who has the motivation and resources to orchestrate something this comprehensive? Amanda replied. Shelley's expression hardened as she considered the possibilities. Only one person had both the desperate motivation and the insider knowledge necessary to conduct such a precisely targeted sabotage campaign. Bradley, she said quietly. He's trying to destroy what I've built because he can't accept that I built it without him. But as Shelley contemplated her response to Bradley's betrayal, she remembered something her father had mentioned in his final letter, something about documented protections that had been put in place to guard against exactly this kind of attack. That evening, Shelley called Mr. Peterson, her father's attorney, requesting an urgent meeting to discuss additional provisions in her inheritance that might be relevant to her current circumstances. Ms. Wilson, Peterson said when they met, your father was a remarkably prescient man. He anticipated that your ex-husband might attempt to sabotage your success if he ever felt threatened by your achievements. Peterson withdrew another sealed envelope from his seemingly inexhaustible collection of documents. Your father included specific instructions for dealing with industrial espionage and reputation attacks. He hired a permanent security firm to monitor threats against your interests and document any attempts at corporate sabotage. Shelley felt a surge of gratitude for her father's protective wisdom. Are you saying they've been monitoring Bradley's activities? Everything, Ms. Wilson. Every meeting, every payment, every anonymous communication. Your father's security team has been building a comprehensive case file of your ex-husband's sabotage attempts. Peterson handed her a thick manila folder. This contains documented evidence of bribery, conspiracy, fraud, and corporate espionage. More than enough to destroy Mr. Wood's remaining credibility and expose his criminal behavior to law enforcement. As Shelley reviewed the evidence, audio recordings of Bradley's meetings with Marcus Chen, financial records of his payments to informants, copies of his anonymous communications to journalists, and regulatory agencies, she felt a profound sense of her father's continued protection reaching across the void of death to shield her from harm. The folder also contained something else, a detailed plan for exposing Bradley's sabotage during the upcoming quarterly shareholders' meeting, where his betrayal would be revealed to the board of directors, the media, and the business community with devastating precision. Her father had not only anticipated Bradley's attacks, he had prepared the perfect trap to ensure that his attempts at sabotage would become the instrument of his final destruction. Chapter 8. The Father's Wisdom. The greatest victories belong to those who fight not with hatred, but with the patient precision of truth waiting for its moment to shine. The quarterly shareholders' meeting for Wilson Global Industries was scheduled to take place in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, the same venue where corporate empires had been built and destroyed for decades. As Shelley Wilson reviewed the presentation materials in her suite the night before, she felt the weight of her father's strategic genius guiding her toward a confrontation that would reshape the entire landscape of corporate accountability. The security reports that Mr. Peterson had provided painted a comprehensive picture of Bradley's sabotage campaign that was far more extensive than even she had imagined. The documentation included not only evidence of his direct attacks against Wilson Global Industries, but proof of a coordinated effort to manipulate regulatory agencies, corrupt business journalists, and intimidate employees into providing false testimony. He's been more thorough than I gave him credit for, Shelley murmured, as she studied transcripts of recorded conversations between Bradley and his network of paid informants. but not nearly as thorough as my father. The most damaging evidence came from audio recordings of Bradley's meetings with Marcus Chen, where he had explicitly outlined his plan to destroy Shelley's reputation by any means necessary and create artificial crises that would undermine confidence in her leadership abilities. The morning of the meeting dawned grey and overcast, but the grand ballroom was filled with the energy of major corporate theatre. Shareholders, board members, financial analysts, and business journalists had gathered to hear Wilson Global Industries' quarterly report and strategic outlook. Bradley Wood was not officially invited to the meeting, but he had positioned himself in the hotel lobby, ostensibly conducting business calls, but actually monitoring the proceedings and waiting for the right moment to implement the final phase of his sabotage campaign. He had arranged for Marcus Chen to raise pointed questions during the shareholder comment period about budget transparency. Rebecca from marketing was prepared to make public allegations about questionable practices she claimed to have witnessed. 3 planted journalists were ready to ask aggressive questions about the regulatory investigations that Bradley's false complaints had triggered. As Shelley took the stage to begin her presentation, she appeared calm and confident, but Bradley could see tension in her posture that suggested she was aware of the attacks that were coming. "Ladies and gentlemen," Shelley began, her voice carrying easily through the packed ballroom, "Wilson Global Industries has experienced the most successful quarter in the company's history, but our achievements extend far beyond financial metrics." She outlined the remarkable growth in revenue and market share that had occurred under her leadership, the successful launch of the Wilson Foundation's women's empowerment programs, and the expanding impact of the Children's Education Initiative. But as the presentation moved into the question and answer period, Bradley's carefully orchestrated attack began to unfold. Marcus Chen stood up first, his voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced concern. "Ms. Wilson, there have been reports of significant budget irregularities related to your charitable initiatives. Can you address concerns that shareholder funds are being diverted to unsustainable vanity projects?" Shelley regarded Marcus with interest rather than defensiveness, her response suggesting she had been expecting exactly this kind of challenge. "That's an excellent question, Marcus. In fact, budget transparency is something I take very seriously." She gestured to the large screen behind her, which displayed a comprehensive financial breakdown of all charitable initiatives, including detailed accounting of every dollar spent and clear documentation of the return on investment for each program. Marcus looked momentarily stunned by the thoroughness of her response, but pressed forward with his prepared script. "Nevertheless, some employees have expressed concerns about the rapid pace of expansion." "Which employees, specifically?" Shelley asked with polite curiosity. Marcus hesitated, realizing that he couldn't identify specific sources without exposing the coordinated nature of the attack. "Anonymous sources who were concerned about potential retaliation." "I see," Shelley nodded thoughtfully. "Anonymous sources making unsubstantiated allegations about budget irregularities. That does sound concerning." Rebecca from marketing stood up next, her voice sharp with manufactured indignation. "Ms. Wilson, during your time at Wood Enterprises, you were involved in several questionable strategic decisions that skirted regulatory guidelines. How can shareholders be confident that you're not using similar practices here?" This time, Shelley's smile carried a hint of anticipation that should have warned Bradley that his carefully laid trap was about to spring in the wrong direction. "Rebecca, I'm very glad you brought up my time at Wood Enterprises," Shelley said, her voice taking on a tone of deadly precision. "In fact, that brings us to a very important matter that I believe this audience needs to understand." The screen behind her changed again, this time displaying a series of audio transcripts and financial records that caused a ripple of shocked recognition to spread through the ballroom. "What you're seeing," Shelley continued, is documented evidence of a systematic campaign to sabotage Wilson Global Industries through bribery, conspiracy, and fraudulent allegations. A campaign orchestrated by my ex-husband Bradley Wood, using paid informants and manufactured crises designed to undermine our company's success. The audience erupted in gasps and excited murmurs as the scope of Bradley's betrayal became clear. Board members leaned forward to study the evidence more closely, while journalists frantically took notes and photographers captured the historic moment. The man who spent decades taking credit for my strategic contributions to Wood Enterprises has now spent months attempting to destroy the company I've built through my own leadership, Shelley said, her voice growing stronger with each word. But what Mr. Wood failed to understand is that my father anticipated exactly this kind of attack. She gestured to Mr. Peterson, who rose from his seat in the front row, holding another familiar manila envelope. Robert Wilson included specific provisions in my inheritance designed to protect against industrial espionage and reputation attacks, Shelley explained. For the past several months, a professional security team has been documenting every aspect of Mr. Wood's sabotage campaign. The screen now displayed photos of Bradley's clandestine meetings with Marcus Chen, audio transcripts of his conversations with Rebecca, financial records of his payments to false informants, and copies of his anonymous communications to regulatory agencies and journalists. Bradley, watching from the hotel lobby through a live stream on his phone, felt the blood drain from his face as he realized that his entire sabotage campaign had been monitored, recorded, and turned into evidence that would destroy whatever remained of his reputation and credibility. Furthermore, Shelley continued, my father included a specific legal mechanism for dealing with attempts at corporate sabotage by former associates. Mr. Peterson approached the podium and handed Shelley another document. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a comprehensive lawsuit against Bradley Wood for industrial espionage, conspiracy, fraud, and attempted corporate sabotage. The evidence is overwhelming, and the damages being sought include full compensation for the costs of defending against his attacks, punitive damages for the attempted destruction of our charitable programs, and criminal referrals to appropriate law enforcement agencies. The ballroom fell silent as the implications became clear. Bradley had not only failed to damage Shelley's reputation, he had provided documented evidence of criminal behavior that would likely result in his imprisonment. My father's wisdom extended beyond business strategy into understanding the psychology of men who mistake borrowed brilliance for personal achievement, Shelley said, her voice carrying a note of profound gratitude. He knew that Bradley would eventually reveal his true character through his own desperate actions. She looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting the meeting live, knowing that Bradley was watching his world collapse in real time. The most important lesson from this experience is not about revenge or personal vindication, Shelley continued. It's about the importance of building systems that protect integrity, reward genuine achievement, and ensure that those who attempt to destroy others through deception ultimately destroy only themselves. The standing ovation that followed was not just an acknowledgement of Wilson Global Industries' financial success, but a celebration of justice finally being served to those who had spent decades diminishing brilliance while claiming credit for achievements they never earned. As the audience filed out of the ballroom, buzzing with excitement about the dramatic revelations they had witnessed, Bradley Wood sat alone in his car in the hotel parking garage, staring at his phone as news alerts began appearing about his criminal exposure and the comprehensive evidence of his sabotage campaign. The man who had spent the morning believing he was about to destroy Shelley's reputation had instead provided the final proof of his own moral bankruptcy, ensuring that his name would forever be associated with corporate fraud rather than business success. But for Shelley Wilson, the real victory was not Bradley's downfall. It was the knowledge that she had finally stepped fully into the role her father had always known she was destined to fill, protected by his wisdom and empowered by her own unshakable integrity. Chapter 9. The Exposure. When truth finally breaks free from the shadows, it burns away all pretense and leaves only the naked reality of who people truly are. The ballroom of the Meridian Hotel had witnessed countless corporate dramas over the decades, but nothing quite like the moment when Bradley Wood burst through the main doors, his face flushed with desperation and rage, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of pacing in the parking garage. The live stream of the shareholders' meeting had shown him everything. His carefully orchestrated sabotage campaign exposed, his criminal behavior documented, his reputation destroyed beyond any possibility of recovery. "This is insane," Bradley shouted, his voice carrying across the ballroom and causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. "She's manipulating all of you with fabricated evidence and emotional manipulation." Every head turned toward the disruption, cameras swiveling to capture Bradley's unhinged entrance. Security guards immediately moved to intercept him, but Shelley raised her hand, signaling them to hold their positions. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said calmly, her voice carrying easily through the suddenly silent room, "it appears that Mr. Wood has decided to join us after all." Bradley pushed through the crowd of startled shareholders and board members, his eyes locked on Shelley with a mixture of fury and desperation that made several people step back instinctively. "You think you've won," Bradley snarled, pointing an accusatory finger at her. "You think you can destroy me with your father's money and fabricated accusations?" The murmur that rippled through the audience carried undertones of shock and embarrassment for Bradley's public breakdown. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances, while journalists frantically documented the extraordinary spectacle of a prominent businessman's complete psychological collapse. Shelley regarded Bradley with a mixture of pity and steely determination. "I haven't destroyed you, Bradley. You've destroyed yourself through your own choices, your own actions, your own inability to accept that someone else might be more capable than you." "Capable?" Bradley's laugh was harsh and bitter. "You've never closed a major deal in your life. You've never had to put your reputation on the line for a strategic decision. Everything you think you accomplished was really me protecting you from the consequences of your naive idealism." The silence in the ballroom was deafening as 300 of the most influential people in corporate America watched Bradley Wood systematically demolish his own credibility with each desperate word. Margaret Torres stepped forward from her position near the podium, her voice cutting through Bradley's rant with clinical precision. "Mr. Wood, perhaps you'd like to explain the $50,000 you paid Marcus Chen to provide false information about our company's financial practices?" Bradley's face went white as he realized that his bribery had been specifically documented and was now being discussed in front of the entire business community. That was legitimate consulting," he stammered. "Marcus was providing market analysis that any company would want to understand about their competitors." Dr. Amanda Foster joined Margaret, holding a tablet displaying transcripts of recorded conversations. "Market analysis? Is that what you call this conversation, where you explicitly told Mr. Chen to document any questionable decisions and create evidence of financial irregularities, whether they existed or not?" She began reading directly from the transcript in Bradley's own voice. "I don't care if the company is actually successful. I just need enough manufactured controversy to make investors question whether she's competent to lead a major corporation." The ballroom erupted in gasps, angry murmurs, and the rapid clicking of camera shutters as the full scope of Bradley's conspiracy became undeniably clear. Board members were visibly appalled, shareholders were shaking their heads in disgust, and journalists were live-streaming updates about the most dramatic corporate scandal in recent memory. Bradley looked around the room, seeing his reflection in hundreds of faces that now regarded him with contempt, disgust, and professional revulsion. These were people who had once respected him, invited him to exclusive events, sought his business partnerships. Now they were witnessing his complete moral bankruptcy in real time. "You don't understand," Bradley said, his voice rising to near hysteria. "She's been planning this for months. This whole inheritance story, the timing of the divorce, the media coverage, it's all been orchestrated to make me look like the villain." David Harrison, the CFO, stepped forward with another set of documents. "Mr. Wood, are you also claiming that Ms. Wilson orchestrated your attempts to blackmail Jennifer Walsh, our public relations director, into providing confidential information about our business strategies?" Jennifer Walsh herself emerged from the crowd, her face pale but determined. "I'd like the shareholders to know that Mr. Wood threatened to destroy my career with fabricated insurance fraud allegations. Unless I cooperated with his intelligence-gathering efforts, the revelation sent another wave of shock through the audience. Corporate espionage was one thing, but blackmail and intimidation crossed lines that even hardened business executives found unacceptable. Bradley was now surrounded by a circle of accusing faces, documented evidence of his crimes being presented from multiple directions. His desperate attempts at self-justification becoming increasingly incoherent. "She's turned all of you against me," he shouted. "Can't you see what she's doing? She's using her father's money to buy loyalty and fabricate evidence." Senator Catherine Walsh, who had been observing the proceedings as a guest, stood up from her seat in the front row. "Mr. Wood, I've been reviewing the documentation that's been presented today. As someone who chairs the Senate Committee on Corporate Accountability, I can assure you that this evidence will be forwarded to appropriate law enforcement agencies for criminal investigation." The blood drained from Bradley's face as he realized that his actions had attracted the attention of federal authorities. Corporate espionage, conspiracy, fraud, and blackmail were federal crimes that could result in decades of imprisonment. "You can't do this to me," Bradley whispered, his voice breaking as the magnitude of his situation finally penetrated his desperate denial. "I built Wood Enterprises from nothing. I created jobs, generated wealth, contributed to the economy. I deserve respect, not this persecution." Shelley's voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet but carried to every corner of the silent ballroom. "You built Wood Enterprises on my ideas, my strategies, my innovations. You took credit for achievements that weren't yours and convinced yourself that the applause belonged to you." She stepped closer to Bradley, her presence commanding despite her calm demeanor. "But that's not even the worst part of what you've done. The worst part is that you tried to destroy programs that help children get better educations and women start their own businesses. You were willing to damage thousands of innocent people just to satisfy your own ego." The circle of accusers continued to tighten as more evidence was presented. Rebecca from marketing, Bradley's own accomplice, had been arrested earlier that morning after confessing to filing false regulatory complaints. Marcus Chen had been terminated from Wilson Global Industries and was facing his own criminal charges for corporate espionage. Board member after board member stood up to express their support for Shelley's leadership and their disgust with Bradley's criminal behavior. Each statement drove another nail into the coffin of Bradley's reputation and professional future. "I move that Wilson Global Industries pursue the maximum legal remedies against Mr. Wood for his attempted sabotage of our company," declared Board Chairman Robert Martinez. "Seconded," came voices from around the room, all in favor. The vote was unanimous, 15 board members raising their hands in a gesture that sealed Bradley's fate and cemented Shelley's position as the undisputed leader of one of America's most powerful corporations. Bradley looked around the room one final time, seeing nothing but contempt and determination to hold him accountable for his actions. The man who had entered the building believing he could destroy Shelley's reputation was now facing criminal prosecution. civil lawsuits, and complete social and professional ostracism. "Security," Shelley said quietly. "Please escort Mr. Wood from the building." As two uniformed guards approached Bradley, he made one last desperate attempt at salvaging something from the wreckage of his life. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying a hollow threat that convinced no one. "I have resources, connections, ways to fight back that you can't imagine." Shelley's response was delivered with the calm authority of someone who had already won every battle that mattered. "Your resources consisted of other people's achievements that you claimed as your own. Your connections were built on lies that have now been exposed. And your ways of fighting back have all been documented as criminal conspiracies." The security guards took Bradley's arms and began escorting him toward the exit, cameras capturing every moment of his humiliation. As they reached the ballroom doors, Bradley turned back for one final look at the woman who had transformed from his victim into his nemesis. "I made you," he called out desperately. "Without me, you would have been nothing." Shelley's smile was radiant as she delivered her final response. "No, Bradley, you unmade yourself. I just gave you the opportunity to show everyone who you really are." The doors closed behind Bradley with a finality that echoed through the ballroom like the closing of a chapter in corporate history. The man who had spent decades building his empire on stolen brilliance was now facing the complete destruction of everything he had claimed to achieve. But inside the ballroom, the energy was entirely different. Shareholders, board members, and business leaders were buzzing with excitement about the extraordinary demonstration of leadership, integrity, and strategic brilliance they had just witnessed. The unanimous vote of confidence in Shelley's leadership was followed by spontaneous applause that grew into a standing ovation lasting several minutes. This was not just approval of her business acumen, it was celebration of a transformational moment when justice had finally been served and authentic leadership had triumphed over fraudulent ambition. As the formal meeting concluded and attendees began to mingle, the conversation centered on Wilson Global Industries' remarkable future under Shelley's guidance and the broader implications of what they had witnessed for corporate accountability throughout their industry. The woman who had entered the divorce proceedings, seeking only fair treatment, was now positioned as one of the most influential business leaders in America. With the unanimous support of her board, the respect of her industry, and the documented evidence that her success was built on genuine capability rather than borrowed brilliance. Chapter 10. Reborn. The phoenix rises not from comfort, but from the ashes of what others tried to destroy, emerging more magnificent than ever imagined. 6 months later, Shelley Wilson sat in her corner office on the 60th floor of Wilson Global Industries headquarters, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and possibility. The morning newspapers spread across her mahogany desk told a story that still seemed almost too extraordinary to believe. Even as she lived it every day, the woman who rose from mockery to majesty, how Shelley Wilson transformed corporate leadership, read the headline of Fortune magazine's cover story. The accompanying photograph showed her signing a landmark partnership agreement with 3 major international corporations, her smile radiating the confidence of someone who had finally stepped fully into her own power. The past months had brought a cascade of recognition that validated everything her father had believed about her capabilities. Time magazine had named her one of the most influential people in business. Harvard Business School had invited her to deliver the keynote address at their annual leadership conference. The president had appointed her to a special commission on sustainable economic development. But the accolades, while gratifying, were less important to Shelley than the concrete changes her leadership had created. The Wilson Foundation had now provided startup capital to over 2,000 women entrepreneurs, generating hundreds of millions in new business revenue and creating thousands of jobs. The Children's Education Initiative had expanded to serve 43 school districts, with measurable improvements in academic performance that were being studied by education policy experts nationwide. Most significantly, Wilson Global Industries had become a model for how major corporations could achieve exceptional financial success while creating positive social impact. Their stock price had doubled, their market share had expanded into new international territories, and their employee satisfaction ratings were the highest in their industry. The phone on her desk buzzed with an incoming call from Margaret Torres, who had evolved from interim CEO to Chief Operating Officer and had become one of Shelley's most trusted strategic partners. "Good morning, Ms. Wilson," Margaret said, her voice carrying the energy that had become characteristic of their leadership team. "I have the final numbers on the Morrison Global Partnership Agreement." "I'm listening," Shelley replied, settling back in her leather chair as she prepared to review another milestone in their company's remarkable growth. The contract value is $8.7 billion over 5 years, with expansion options that could take it past $15 billion. More importantly, the partnership gives us access to European and Asian markets that would have taken us decades to penetrate independently. Shelley smiled, remembering the morning months ago when Thomas Morrison had called Bradley seeking to terminate their relationship with Wood Enterprises. Now Morrison Global was eager to partner with Wilson Global Industries, recognizing that Shelley's strategic vision offered opportunities that went far beyond anything Bradley had ever conceived. "Excellent work, Margaret. What's the timeline for implementation?" "We're ready to begin Phase 1 next month. The international expansion will create approximately 3,000 new jobs, and we're prioritizing hiring from the communities where our educational programs are active." After ending the call, Shelley walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city below. Somewhere in that urban landscape, Bradley Wood was discovering what life looked like when built on foundations of sand rather than genuine achievement. The criminal trial had concluded with Bradley's conviction on multiple federal charges including conspiracy, fraud, and corporate espionage. He had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with additional civil judgments that had stripped him of virtually all his remaining assets. Wood Enterprises had been liquidated, its client base and intellectual property acquired by Wilson Global Industries for a fraction of their peak value. More devastating than the financial ruin was Bradley's complete social and professional exile. Former colleagues avoided him. Business associations had revoked his memberships, and the corporate world that had once celebrated him now used his name as a cautionary tale about the dangers of building success on stolen achievements. Shelley felt no satisfaction in Bradley's downfall, only a profound sense of justice finally being served. She had not sought revenge. She had simply refused to allow him to continue profiting from her brilliance while destroying others who threatened his fragile ego. The real victory was not in Bradley's punishment, but in her own transformation from invisible contributor to recognized leader. Every strategic decision she made, every innovative program she launched, every partnership she negotiated now bore her name and reflected her vision. Her assistant's voice came through the intercom, interrupting her reflections. "Ms. Wilson, you have a call from Senator Walsh regarding the Sustainable Development legislation. Please put her through." "Senator Catherine." Walsh's voice carried excitement and authority as she delivered news that would reshape federal policy on corporate social responsibility. "Shelley, I wanted to personally inform you that the Wilson Corporate Accountability Act has passed both houses of Congress. The President will be signing it into law next week, and we'd like you to be present for the ceremony." The legislation, inspired by Shelley's demonstration that corporations could achieve superior financial performance while creating positive social impact, would require large companies to meet specific standards for community investment and employee welfare. I'm honored, Senator. This represents the kind of systemic change that can benefit millions of working families. Your leadership has shown that doing good and doing well are not mutually exclusive goals. The business community is finally starting to understand that sustainable practices and social responsibility enhance rather than diminish profitability. As the call ended, Shelley reflected on her father's wisdom in preparing her for exactly this moment. He had understood that true leadership required not just strategic brilliance, but the moral courage to use power responsibly. The inheritance he had left her was not just financial resources, but the knowledge that she possessed the capabilities to reshape entire industries while creating opportunities for others. Her thoughts were interrupted by another call, this one from David Chen at Harrison & Associates, who had become one of her closest strategic partners in developing innovative approaches to sustainable business practices. Shelley, I have a proposal that I think will interest you. We're forming a consortium of women-led corporations to jointly invest in clean energy infrastructure across Southeast Asia. The potential market is enormous, and the environmental impact could be transformational. Send me the details, Shelley replied immediately. That sounds exactly like the kind of collaborative leadership that can create lasting change. As the conversation continued, Shelley found herself energized by the possibilities that lay ahead. Her father had prepared her for the battle she had just won, but the war for corporate accountability and social responsibility was far from over. The afternoon brought a series of meetings with international partners, strategic planning sessions for new initiatives, and reviews of expansion proposals that would extend Wilson Global Industries' impact into emerging markets around the world. But perhaps the most meaningful part of her day came during a video conference with scholarship recipients from the Children's Education Initiative. Seeing young people from underserved communities describing how educational opportunities had changed their lives reminded Shelley why her father's gift had been so much more than money. It was the chance to create lasting positive change in the world. As evening approached, Shelley signed the final documents for the Morrison Global Partnership, her signature authorizing agreements that would create thousands of jobs, generate billions in revenue, and establish Wilson Global Industries as a truly global leader in sustainable business development. Her reflection in the office window showed a woman transformed, not just by wealth or recognition, but by the profound satisfaction of finally living as her authentic self. The invisible contributor had become a visible leader. The dismissed wife had become a respected executive. The woman who had been told she was nothing without him had become everything she was always meant to be. The intercom buzzed one final time with a message from her assistant. Ms. Wilson, your car is ready for the charity gala. The evening would bring another opportunity to celebrate the achievements of women entrepreneurs who had received support from the Wilson Foundation. Another chance to see the concrete impact of leadership focused on lifting others rather than diminishing them. As Shelley gathered her materials and prepared to leave the office, she paused at her father's portrait, which now held a place of honor on the wall behind her desk. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carrying gratitude not just for the inheritance, but for the faith he had always had in her capabilities. The woman who walked out of Wilson Global Industries that evening was not the same person who had filed for divorce in a desperate bid for freedom months earlier. She was not just free, she was reborn, transformed, and ready to use her power to transform the world around her. The phoenix had risen from the ashes of what others tried to destroy, emerging more magnificent than anyone had ever imagined possible.